I've got a couple of mental models that I would like to share with you that we use in IBM Design. I am the head of design at IBM. We are trying to instantiate a reemergence of a design culture that literally is unparalleled in corporate history. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it was actually the son of our founder, when he was chairman of IBM, it was Thomas Watson Jr. that said, "Good design is good business." What you're looking at here is actually one of the artifacts that we've dug up as we've tried to really resurrect a sustainable culture of design across the breadth of IBM's 400,000 plus people, 4,000 of which are here on our Dublin campus. Good design is good business. You've heard that this morning. I suspect because you're here, you believe that. So I want to talk about design, and I want to talk about, first, I want to share some thoughts about this word experience. Tom talked a lot about experience. Kevin talked about the process of design and experience. We heard about the experience of medical devices and of medical treatment. Everybody wants to deliver a better customer experience. We started down the path of client experience, our word for that program at IBM. And one of the first things that we really started to think about, because of course at IBM, our singular problem, to be honest with you, is scale. When we do something, we have to think about being a citizen of over 170 countries in the world, and we have to think about an employee population of 400,000 plus, and we have to think about our client population, the population of users in the world that are impacted by IBM at scale. Some 85% of the world's economic transactions flow over IBM systems. Imagine if we can enhance the experience of access to those systems. Imagine what we could do for the world's economies. So we really started to think about this word experience. When you go to find something, that's an experience, a moment of truth. When you go to find headache remedies, this might be what you're confronted with. We've all had the experience of the first time we've tried to do something. We learned to drive a car. We have the experience of using something every day. A great designer, Bill Moggridge, I love one of his quotes. I like the idea of wearing in instead of wearing out. The everyday use of something is an experience. The maintenance of something is an experience. The reuse of something is an experience. How do you extend your offering? How will your customers' customers extend the offering? And how do we get support? The interesting thing is, as we started to dissect this word experience so that we could scale great experiences for our clients, is we came up with a framework that we think is a universal framework that allows at least us to have a much more interesting conversation with ourselves and with our clients and with the marketplace about the experiences that we're designing. We call them the 6 experiences. And so this is the first frame that I want to kind of have you think about is, what is an experience? We all talk about it, but one of the things that we have found most important as we embark on this journey of design is that we quit talking about abstractions. Tom spoke really eloquently about the fact of get out in the world and do stuff. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Prototype, prototype, prototype. Deliver. Everything is an experiment. Whether it's today in my life, whether it's a product that's a physical thing like a vacuum cleaner, or whether it's a software product, or whether it's a service that we're delivering. Everything is a prototype. The 6 experiences of design thinking were one of the first concepts that we actually wrapped ourselves around to start thinking about how we scale a program of design at IBM. Everything has a discovery experience. The UK government website, I think, is probably one of the most effective self-service citizen websites in the world. It's easy to discover those services. Services that can't be discovered can't be used. You have to think about that experience of how people find what you're selling or what you're offering. We have to think about that first use or getting started experience. What does it mean? And it means more than downloading an application and having a bunch of Comic Sans typeface pointing to some button on your mobile phone and then wiping it away and getting into everyday use. We have to start thinking about how we bring human beings into the thing that we want them to consume and use. Everyday use is probably the one that we major in, but we have to start thinking about how we manage and upgrade things. In the software world, we have to start thinking about the ecosystem of developers, the superhumans of the 21st century, and how they can actually access these via APIs. And finally, we have to think more intrinsically about how people get support across all of these experiences. Once we began to start framing this, we then stepped back and we took a look at where we were at IBM, and maybe this resonates with kind of where you all were. We first identified approximately how many projects we wanted to be able to run simultaneously in our strategic imperatives. For us, it's about 300 simultaneous projects. At the time that we started this about 2.5 years ago, we were able to support only a fraction of these. And I'm talking about less than a dozen simultaneous projects where we could bring the forces of great design and deliver the experiences that we wanted to deliver. We also took a look at our own culture, and we found that we had about one designer for about every 60 developers. The companies that we compete with and the companies that you compete with, at least with respect to their IT assets, have about one designer for every 3 developers in the mobile world. We had to make a significant investment in the formally trained design talent that we brought on board. And we had to make an organizational commitment to design at a scale and a breadth of which I think probably nobody has ever seen before. And so we started our group, which we called Ibm Design, about 1.5 years ago. We started with a very simple formula. And a couple of the questions for the previous panel really dwelled on this of, okay, I buy it. I want to do great design. How do I actually do this at scale in my company? We spent about 6 or 8 months crafting our program, and it was all based around this simple formula. People plus practices plus places, and places are very important, equal great outcomes. I told you that we didn't have enough people to staff the projects that we wanted. We had a ratio of designers to business people or developers that was untenable if we wanted to actually deliver great design. And so the first place we started was people. It was great to see the University of Limerick here. We've also, where we've recruited some of our great designers that are living and working here in Dublin. IADT is another school, I'll be there tomorrow, where we do a lot of recruiting. Looking at design schools like the D School at Stanford or these schools here in Ireland, the RCA in London, Savannah College of Art and Design, RISD, the future leaders of tomorrow are going to come from our design programs. I have no hesitation whatsoever in saying that. When companies like Airbnb are founded by 2 RISD designers, you know that something has changed in the world. And I think that the thinking skills, the critical thinking skills, and the human-first application of principles, and this understanding of how to empathize with your customer and how to rapidly iterate on solving the right problem for that customer, this is the business leadership that we have to start fostering. And the leverage we get from these people, if you're talking about job growth here in Ireland, the leverage that you get from every designer is an ecosystem of about 30 other employees that are empowered because of that designer's existence. It is a terrific source of job creation leverage and creativity. Let's talk a little bit about what we've done with people. People's where we start with everything. You may not think that this is what IBM looks like, but this is what IBM looks like. This was actually the graduating class from a 3-month design camp that we run for university hires. We're in the midst of a program where we're adding over 1,000 formally trained designers to IBM over a 5-year period. We started this 2 years ago. In those 2 years, we've added 350 of that 1,000, about 20 or 25 of which are here in Ireland. We're going to be doubling that number by the end of the year. This is the new IBM. I think we talked earlier today about the growth of Ireland to 10 million people. However it grows or doesn't grow, I will tell you that by the year 2020, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. We better be designing better experiences, better products, better services to support that population, not just because of their numerical weight, but because of the heightened sense of expectation that they have with respect to every single thing that they want to consume. And so we have millennials designing for millennials. We're recruiting from the best programs in the world. We've started an internship project where we run 3 internships per year, winter, summer, and fall. That is probably the most intense design internship that exists in the world. We restrict it to 15 students, and the culmination of that exercise is sitting in the corporate boardroom in Armonk presenting to our senior leadership team. And in each case, they've received a standing ovation for the results of their work, and in many of the cases, the work has already made it into our shipping products. These are people that are still in school. IBM's signature cloud platform, some of you may have heard of Bluemix, which is our platform that we are promoting for all cloud development globally. Bluemix was the result of a project from our summer 2013 design camp of people that were 6 months out of college. A team of 5 began that. It is now IBM's strategic statement to the world. Now, underneath that, we've got thousands of engineers developing infrastructure. But the initial design language and the initial concept of how can people discover these services, how can they understand and initially use these services, and how can they use them and maintain them every day, came from a very small team of people that were recent college graduates. But we've also hired about 1/3 of those people from industry. And in fact, some of our designers are some of the best in the world. Adam Cutler, who won a Webby Award for the design of a platform called Open Pediatrics, which, much to like what we saw earlier today, delivers real-time video surgical procedures to remote places in the world so that doctors and even quasi-doctors get access to the very best understanding from the Children's Hospital in Boston in real time during surgical operations. Denise Burton was with Frog Design 20 years, was a fellow with Frog Design, and became so inspired by the mission of reinvigorating design at the scale of IBM that she joined us about 1.5 years ago. And Doug Powell, who's past president of the largest design organization in the world, the American Institute of Graphic Artists, also became so inspired that he now heads up our education and activation activities. In fact, in a sense, we've developed a university within IBM for design, and last year we educated and graduated 5,000 IBMers in the principles of design thinking. And that takes us to our practices. The practices that we put in place are all built upon the foundation of design thinking. We've worked very closely with the people that initially codified these principles, this notion of how do you scalably get empathy with human beings that want to consume your products and services? How do you rapidly prototype? And how do you then change and move forward and deliver these to the world? So design thinking is the basis for the practices that we've put in place. But one of the problems, if you will, or one of the unsolved problems with design thinking is it's very difficult to scale across very complex teams that are geographically dispersed. And so, much like the framework that we put around the definition of experiences, we've put together a framework around the generic, if you will, design thinking concepts that we use to create what we call IBM's version of design thinking, IBM Design Thinking, that allows us to scale it globally across our very complex teams. The interesting thing about design thinking versus design, if you will, is that design and formally trained designers bring a talent and a capability to IBM that we haven't had for decades. Design thinking is actually something that everybody in IBM aspires to become. We all want that creative confidence that we need to make the breakthrough innovations that we want to. Everybody at IBM needs to be, and we want them to be, design thinkers. We use IBM Design Thinking as a transformation vehicle for everything that we do. And around design thinking, we put three pretty simple concepts. And again, one of the questions that came up earlier in the panel kind of speaks to that. I think the question was something around, actually it was something that Kevin mentioned about the vocabulary that we use. We've been very specific about a few choice words around these concepts. There's three that I'll share with you today. The first one is this notion of hills. One of the things that we found in the enterprise or B2b context of software is, understanding and developing an empathy with a consumer product. Let's take an iPhone. An iPhone's a very complex device. There's very little that we do that's maybe more complex than an iPhone. That's a very complex device. But the use cases outside the iPhone, the use cases in a B2C context are actually relatively simple because people can mash up their workflows at will. I think the statistics of the download and the unloading of applications on iPhones and iPads is something like 90 to 95% of the apps that get downloaded get discarded in a pretty short period of time. People are mashing up their own personal workflows at will. The hard thing to do in a B2B context is you can't mash up your workflow that indiscriminately. There are implications of the ecosystem and dependencies of users around the user that have to be understood. The hills actually allow, what that means is that you get hundreds or thousands of feature requests coming in all the time because the ecosystems of use of any particular application are so specific and so broad. And so we found that our product teams tended to get very random. And if you just let people ideate, there's a million good ideas in the world. And when you have a team of 1,000 people working to solve a problem, the number one killer of innovation isn't lack of innovation. The number one killer is almost too much, too many random streams going on. And so the hills are a way to focus distributed teams on very large problems so that everybody is aligned with the problem you're trying to solve. We're going to send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth. You can't do that with a two-pizza team. It takes a huge team. It takes dozens of experiments, thousands of experiments, 50 launches. It takes tens of thousands of people, but they're all aligned around one goal that is implementation independent. It allows the distributed teams to do their thing, but keeps everybody aligned. The hills are a huge concept for us in scaling design thinking across our organization. Every release, every product has 3 and only 3 hills that the team is working on at any given point in time. The second concept I'll share with you is this notion of sponsor users. Tom talked a lot about the requirement in doing great design of getting out in the field and doing qualitative research. In software, we do a lot of quantitative research. We get metrics back, but that generally just validates or rejects what you've proposed. The qualitative research allows for a deeper level of understanding. The question is, for many of us in this room, how do you scale that across a large or medium-sized business? How do you scale the concept of developing intimate relationships with your customers and the users at your customers time and time and time again? We can't be intuitive about this. There has to be a method to it. Sponsor users are a construct that we've put in place that all of our product teams are now actively recruiting people to be intimately involved in the product development process, allows us to go out in the field, do the interviews and the observations that Tom talked about in a scalable, systematic way. And finally, we'll talk about playbacks. In any company, and by the way, I've been with IBM only 5 years. I'm not very long in the IBM world. For 30 years before that, I did startups. I had 3 startups. In 2010, my company was bought by IBM, and I fully expected that within a few months or a few quarters, I would probably be doing startup number 4. When the opportunity to bring design thinking into a company like IBM and to really create an institution, a capability in an institution like that to really advance the world was a tremendous opportunity. But what I noticed both in startups, my first company I started myself, and then I would added people before I sold it. The third company ended up with about 300 people. And I will tell you that once you add the first person outside of the founders, you start getting siloed behavior. I don't care if it's 4 people or 400,000 people. Silos exist. And once silos exist, hierarchies begin to exist. And once hierarchies begin to exist, the path to great critical thinking at scale diminishes. And so one of the things that we've intentionally tried to do as a part of implementing design in a corporate context is how do you break out of, how do you still let the organization do what the organization does, which is processes and makes decisions and moves forward at scale, but how within that context do you break out of that context so that you can do the proper critiques that designers need to actually iterate on their work and to get buy-in to ideas? How do you create transparency, and how do you obliterate hierarchy when you're talking about this, but still respecting it when you're dealing with that? We've instituted this notion called playbacks. And playbacks are a thing that our product and services teams do as we are working on any particular initiative, and these are internal projects and external facing projects. Playbacks are a thing where when you come, there's a few rules. First of all, we're just going to talk about the work. You're not going to bring PowerPoint. You're not going to bring a bunch of slides, and we're not going to talk about abstractions. We're not going to talk about markets. You're going to bring the work in its current form, and everybody's an equal. There are no directives in playbacks. We're actually just criticizing the work, and I'm using the word criticism in kind of the classical sense, in the designer sense. Playbacks have been a very effective mechanism in allowing us to do that. One of our very first design camps, which is the education program that we've put in place, one of the very first ones, our chairman brought her 17 direct reports to Austin, Texas, to our studio in Austin. We held a design camp. We went through these principles that I'm going through with you, and after that meeting, from the chairman on down, our very senior leadership to our youngest designers, some of which are here today, participate as equals in playbacks. Now, when you leave the room, you're no longer equals. That's the way it is. But in that session, we're all equals, and we're transparently looking at the work and criticizing it. The second thing that we did is we wanted to inform a new language. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the design language of our properties, of our digital properties, as well as our physical properties. And so we've released this to the world, and if you go to ibm.com/design, you can see it. But the point about our design language is that we spent thoughtful time thinking about how we wanted our brand reflected in our products and services. And we published this. We spent about a year with it internally. We've published it externally because we want our partner community to also embrace this as they build solutions on top of our work. One of you asked a question earlier about the differences between B2b and B2c, and one of the differences, at least in our world, is that in a B2B world, the actual end user of something is 2 steps away. And so we wanted to build an ecosystem of design that used the same visual design language and interaction language that we use at IBM. So we have people, 1,000 formally trained designers. We have practices, essentially the other 429,000 IBMers, if you will. And finally, places. We realized early on that if we didn't change the physical space, we would not actually change the outcomes. I can't stress enough the importance of changing the environment when you move into a design-led culture. And so we decided to make a flagship statement for how product design should be done and what a maker's space looks like for IBM, for the work that we do, and we built that in Austin, Texas. It's a 50,000 square foot studio, and we collaborated with partners all around the world to develop this language that we're now scaling out. So part of these spaces, they open up and they close down. I want to stress this, that this isn't about open space. It is open space. It's not open space with cubes. It's not just open space. We actually took a cue from what's been done at Stanford at the D School there, where they started exploring the actual construction and destruction of space. It's about the movement of space, not about the openness of the space. And so we developed with Steelcase a new product for Steelcase that actually allows for everything to be moved and removed. Again, it's actually the productization of the D School's studio. We've productized it. The first installation in the world was 25,000 square feet of completely destructible space in Austin, Texas. We call it putting up and taking down your brain. In most spaces, you have a bunch of whiteboards, but when that team leaves that room, they take pictures, right? We've all seen the pictures of the Post-it notes and the drawings, and then somehow they get graphed or they get forgotten or whatever. In this space, you actually can leave all that stuff up there. You literally remove the whiteboards from the railing system, and you can create these little huddle rooms as a part of it. You remove the whiteboards from the railing system, you put the whiteboards into Home Depot shopping carts, and when the team comes back a week later, they can recreate their space right down to the last Post-it. These kinds of environments are critical, and so we're taking this language all around IBM. In fact, I'm here today, one of the reasons I'm here today, not just to speak to you guys, but is actually to announce our new design studio in our Dublin facility here, which is going to be very exciting for us. And some of the aspects of the language that you're seeing are very much in evidence there. We intentionally create an environment that is not like IBM. It's a bit irreverent at times. We want our teams focused on the outcomes, and we want them focused on quality. This is actually one of the mood boards from our security team working on security products, keeping banks safe, keeping health information safe, keeping all of our personally identifying information safe. This is what they walk into every single day. It's what they built. It's how they view their world. And it keeps them on their toes that we want to ship great stuff. And in amidst all of this chaos and all of the noise and all of the movement in the space, we consciously put in some space for reflection. We actually spend a lot of time on reflection in the studio. And one of the things that I think that is kind of a pivot of traditional meetings is that in most meetings or in most education settings, you get dumped with a lot of information, and then you spend a little bit of time summarizing. We actually intentionally reverse that. We spend a little bit of time prodding people. We let them work in these spaces, and then we spend a lot of time in reflection and playback. Today, where are we on this journey? We're not finished yet. The mission is to create a sustainable culture of design at IBM, across all of IBM. We're somewhere in the middle of that. We'll find out if we're going to be successful in 2020 or 2025. That's what we're building this for. Today, we can staff, and we have about 100 of our critical projects are staffed with designers and are practicing IBM Design Thinking and using the design language. I told you that we started at 1 to 60. In these 100 projects, we've reduced the ratio to about 1 to 15. We feel like we're about halfway there. For some of our enterprise products, 1 to 10 or 12 is the target. For our mobile products, 1 to 3. It's all about how do we scalably deliver the experience that we need to deliver. And we think we're starting to. We're starting to deliver software and services products that the world is really responding to. In 1956, Thomas Watson Jr. hired our first head of design. This is Elliot Noyes. He was an architect in New York City. This is Elliot in his space. And he created iconic products, products that live in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He pulled together a constellation of designers that has never been equaled. Ray and Charles Eames of the Eames Chair worked at IBM throughout the 1960s and 1970s and brought their whimsy and their sense of beauty and joy and color into IBM. And it was infused throughout IBM in the 60s and 70s. And designers like Paul Rand. We're trying to bring back that heritage of design. We're trying to bring back the leverage that design gives a company like IBM. And like Paul, we're trying to bring a little bit of joy to it too. Thank you very much.